The call came on a Thursday. Renata was at her desk, in the middle of a calculation that required her full attention, and she saw the city planning department number appear on her phone screen, and she set down her pen with the deliberate care of someone who did not trust their hands at this particular moment. She answered. She said yes in all the right places. She said thank you, twice. She wrote down the start date on the corner of the nearest piece of paper, in the handwriting she used when she was paying very careful attention to getting something exactly right. She thanked the person on the other end one more time and set the phone on her desk and looked at it for a moment. Gerald appeared in the doorway of her home office, which was his custom when something changed in the atmosphere of the apartment. He sat down in the doorway and looked at her. "I got it," she said. Gerald blinked once, slowly, which was either agreement or indifference, and she had never successfully determined which. She called Pete first. The connection was better this time, something to do with him being closer to the coast, and she heard his voice clearly when he answered. She said, "You were right." He said, "Obviously," and she could hear that he was smiling. Then he said, "I'm proud of you, Ren," and that came out softer, and she held her phone with both hands for a moment, because Pete only got soft on things that genuinely mattered to him, and she knew that. After Pete, she sat with the news for a few hours. This was her habit with important things, to let them settle before she talked about them widely, to give herself time to feel them clearly, before the congratulations and the celebrations and the inevitable well-meaning advice started arriving from every direction. She texted Marcus that evening. 3 words. She kept it simple on purpose. She wrote, "I got it." His reply came immediately, which was unusual for him. He was normally thoughtful about response time, in the careful way of someone who read messages properly before answering. But this one came back fast. "I know," it said. "Howard called me an hour ago," he said, and I am quoting directly, the clearest thinking he'd heard in that room in a decade. Renata read that twice. She looked at the ceiling. Then she looked at Gerald, who had moved from the doorway to the couch in the time she had not been watching. She typed, "He said that?" Marcus wrote word for word. She set her phone on the cushion beside her and sat for a moment with her hands in her lap. She had gotten the job. She had gotten it on the basis of her model and her portfolio, and 3 years of work, and the answer she had given to the third question in that small fluorescent room. She had gotten it on her own terms, which had always been the only terms she was willing to accept, and the fact of that sat inside her chest, with a solidity that felt earned in the way only things you have worked for honestly can feel. She picked her phone back up. She wrote, "We should celebrate." He wrote, "Cora has been asking about Gerald for 2 weeks. She wants to know if he is truly a loner or if that's a defensive posture." Renata started laughing, the real laugh, and then she was already typing, "Tell her Gerald is available for a formal introduction if she is prepared to earn his trust slowly. Those are his terms." Marcus wrote back, "She says she accepts the challenge." 2 Saturdays later, Marcus and Cora came to Renata's apartment. Cora arrived carrying a small handmade card that said Gerald on the front in pencil, lowercase, which she presented to Renata at the door, with the gravity of someone delivering an important document. "It's for him," Cora said. "He'll be honored," Renata said. She crouched to take it properly, with 2 hands. Cora looked past her into the apartment. Gerald was visible on the back of the couch, enormous and orange, and utterly unconcerned about the arrival of guests. Cora's eyes went wide in a way that she immediately controlled, because she was 6 and had strong feelings about appearing casual. "He's large," she said. "He's very large," Renata confirmed. "Is that a judgment?" Cora asked. "Just a fact." Cora nodded. "Acceptable." They came inside. Marcus had been to the apartment before, many times, but he looked around the way he sometimes did, quietly taking in small details, the housing density maps pinned to the corkboard near her desk, the stack of notebooks on the coffee table, the new city planning department folder on the counter that she had not put away yet, because some part of her still liked to see it there. He looked at the folder and then at her, and she saw what was in his eyes, which was the kind of pride that a person holds for someone else when they have watched them work for something and seen them get there. She looked back at him in the way that said, "I know. You don't have to say it. Meanwhile, Cora had positioned herself at a distance of exactly 3 feet from Gerald and was waiting. Gerald looked at her. Cora looked at Gerald. Nobody moved. Marcus and Renata watched from across the room. Is this normal? Marcus asked in a low voice. Gerald does his own intake process, Renata said. Give it a minute. Gerald looked at the small human crouching in his living space. The small human did not make any loud sounds or sudden movements, or try to pet him before he had completed his assessment, which were all things that Gerald took seriously as eligibility criteria. He blinked slowly. Cora blinked back. She had learned this somewhere, or invented it. She looked at Gerald with complete seriousness and blinked slowly and deliberately. Gerald stood up. He stepped off the back of the couch with the unhurried grace of a large animal that is never in a hurry. He crossed the room in 3 measured steps and sat down in front of Cora. Cora did not move. Gerald touched his nose to her hand, briefly, then sat back. Cora turned and looked at Renata over her shoulder, with the expression of someone who has just been given something they were not sure they deserved. He picked me, she said, barely above a whisper. He picked you, Renata said. Cora turned back to Gerald, with the full solemnity of someone who understood the weight of the moment. She placed her hand very gently on the top of his enormous orange head. Gerald permitted this. Marcus made a sound beside Renata that was very quiet and very particular, and when she looked at him, his expression had shifted into something open and soft, the face he wore when Cora did something that reached him in a place he did not always have access to. He cleared his throat. He looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked back up at Renata. She was already looking at him. They stayed like that for a moment, while Cora had her audience with Gerald on the other side of the room. Marcus said quietly, I owe Dre an enormous amount. Renata considered that. Why? If he hadn't shown up at my door in his jacket with his certainty that I needed to go out that night. He stopped. He shook his head. She looked at him steadily. You still would have walked past my table eventually, she said. I don't know that, he said. I do, she said. You notice things. You noticed that night, and it wasn't because someone made you go out. It was because you're the kind of person who looks. He was quiet for a moment. You looked, too, he said, at the napkin. You could have ignored it. No, she said. I really couldn't have. That was the truth of it. That was the part that she had thought about, in the month since, when the full shape of that night had become clear to her. She had been sitting at that table in a restaurant that was not hers, in an evening that was not going the way she had hoped, and a piece of paper had arrived beside her glass with 3 words on it, and she had read those 3 words and felt something release, and she had chosen, in that small clear moment, to believe them. That was the part no one had done for her. She had done that part herself. She had spent a long time learning to believe the things that were offered honestly. That night, after Cora had conducted a full interview with Gerald and eaten most of a bowl of pasta and drawn a picture on the back of an envelope she found in Renata's kitchen, a drawing of 2 people and 1 very large cat that she labeled Us, in the same careful lowercase as the card she had brought. Marcus and Renata sat at the kitchen table, while Cora lay on the living room floor with Gerald in a state of mutual contentment that neither of them appeared to be questioning. It was 10 in the evening. The apartment was warm and quiet. The housing density maps were on the corkboard. The city planning folder was on the counter. The drawing labeled Us was on the kitchen table between their coffee cups. Marcus said, "She's going to ask to bring that home." Renata said, "She can take it." He looked at her. She looked at the drawing, the 2 stick figures and the enormous orange cat, drawn in brown and orange crayon by a 7-year-old who had titled it, without overthinking the word she chose. "Can I tell you something?" Marcus said. She looked at him. "When I walked to that table," he said, "I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I wasn't going to walk past. I didn't have a plan. I was shaking." "I know," she said. "I could see your hands." He looked at her. "You could?" "From 30 feet away," she said. "You were very calm and your hands were giving you away." He laughed. The real Marcus laugh. The one that came from somewhere that took a moment to reach. He shook his head. "And you still trusted it?" he said. She thought about that honestly. "I trusted the shaking," she said. "People who aren't sure what they're doing can still be doing the right thing. Sometimes those are the people worth trusting." the ones who are scared and do it anyway. He looked at her for a long time. Then he reached across the table and picked up the drawing and turned it over once, looking at it. Cora had signed the bottom corner. She had written her name, not Lily, which was what her birth certificate said, but Cora, which was the name she had chosen herself at age 4, over a bowl of cereal, with the certainty of someone who already knew who they were, and simply needed the rest of the world to catch up. Marcus set the drawing back on the table. "She's going to want to know everything when she's older," he said. "Then we should make sure the story is worth telling," Renata said. In the living room, Cora had fallen asleep with one arm across Gerald, her mouth slightly open, the way children sleep when they have completely run out of energy and not a moment before. Gerald was awake, blinking slowly at the ceiling in the manner of a creature that had seen everything and judged very little. Marcus looked at Renata. She looked at him. There was the restaurant, and the napkin, and the shaking hands, and the message at midnight, and the coffee on Wednesdays, and the bookstore and the 3 floors, and the cat who lived on the 2nd level, and the autumn walks, and the Sunday meals, and the interview room, where they had looked at each other across a small institutional table, and agreed, without saying a word, to set the enormous fact of themselves aside, long enough to do what the room required. There was all of it, and it had brought them here, to this kitchen table, with a drawing labeled "Us" between their coffee cups and a child asleep on the floor with an enormous orange cat. Marcus did not say anything profound. He reached over and picked up his coffee cup, and she picked up hers, and they drank in the warm, easy quiet of people who have found something they were not originally looking for, and have decided, without making a ceremony of it, to keep it. Outside the window, the city was doing what it always did, moving and growing and changing and building itself into new shapes that no one had planned exactly, shapes that would belong, eventually, to the people who lived inside them. Renata would help plan some of those shapes now. She would find the stories inside the numbers and bring them to the rooms where decisions were made, and some of those decisions would become, in time, the structure of streets and the location of schools, and the presence of green space in places that had needed it for years. And Marcus would keep teaching first graders to ask questions they genuinely wanted to know the answers to, and Cora would keep reading the last page first and naming her own self, and assessing cats with the measured authority of someone who had always trusted her own judgment. And all of this had begun with 3 words on a cocktail napkin in a restaurant, with low golden light and tables too small, and a menu with no prices on the side facing the customer. 3 words. A man whose hands were shaking. A woman who believed them anyway. That was the whole story. That was every part of it. Small and specific and quietly extraordinary. The way real things are when they happen to actual people in the middle of ordinary Fridays when they would rather have been on the couch. Cora shifted in her sleep and murmured something that neither of them could make out, and Gerald put one large paw over her hand without waking up, and the city went on outside the window, and Renata and Marcus sat at the kitchen table and let the evening be exactly what it was.